Fisherman catches strange object during sunset. Days later, he vanishes from the village. Frank Miller pulled the heavy net with the usual effort, while the golden sun bid farewell to the horizon of the village of Clear Creek on the Gulf Coast. It was another day of hard work, ending with the hope of having enough fish to support his family. But when he lifted the wet net, something extraordinary caught his attention among the silver fish that were thrashing about. A small mother-of-pearl box shone with iridescent reflections that seemed to dance under the evening light. Frank had never seen anything like it in his 25 years fishing in those waters. "What the devil is this?" he muttered to himself, pushing the fish aside to grab the strange object. The box was delicate, ornamented with designs that resembled seashells and ocean waves. It weighed more than it looked and was closed with a small golden latch that resisted the rust of the sea salt. Frank felt a strange shiver run up his spine, as if that object carried some kind of energy he couldn't explain. Back at the wooden pier where his boat was anchored, Frank observed the box under the brighter light of the lampposts. The colorful reflections were even more intense, creating a hypnotizing spectacle that made him question whether he was really awake. With hands trembling slightly, he turned the latch until he heard a soft click. What he found inside made his heart race. Dozens of letters yellowed by time, carefully folded and tied with a faded satin ribbon. Next to them, a delicate woman's wedding band, with an engraving he could barely make out. The letters gave off an old floral perfume that awakened a distant memory, but one he couldn't place. Frank picked up the first letter carefully, afraid it would fall apart between his fingers. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, and when he began reading the first lines, he felt as if the ground had opened up beneath his feet. "My dear love, the days without you are like eternal nights without stars. I can't forget our secret meetings at Shell Beach, where we promised eternal love." Frank's hands trembled even more. He knew that handwriting. It was impossible, but he knew every curve of those letters, every way she formed her words. It was Susan's handwriting, his wife of 30 years. "It can't be," he whispered, looking around as if someone might be watching. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." Frank folded the letter quickly and tucked the box inside his shirt, feeling the cold metal against his chest. He walked toward his house, a simple 2-story building painted light blue, located just 3 blocks from the harbor. With every step, he felt the weight of the discovery growing, along with a feeling of nausea he couldn't control. Susan was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he arrived. Her gray hair was tied in a loose bun, and she wore the flowered apron Frank had given her as a gift on her last birthday. When she saw him come in, she smiled with the same tenderness as always. "You're home early today, love. How was the fishing?" Frank swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice normal. "Normal. A few fish, nothing special." Susan studied him with that perceptive look she had developed over the years of marriage. "You're pale. Did something happen?" "I'm just tired. I'm going to take a shower." In the bathroom, Frank took the box out of his shirt and placed it on the sink. His hands were still trembling when he opened it again and picked up another letter. It was dated September 1994, 2 years before the birth of Sarah, his oldest daughter. "My dear Gregory, I can hardly wait for our escape to the city. I know it's risky to leave everything behind, but our love is worth any sacrifice. Frank is a good man, but between us there's no passion, only convenience." The paper slipped from Frank's hands and fell to the floor. Gregory. He knew that name. Gregory Harrison, son of the former owner of the canning plant, who had left for New York in the 90s to go to college and never came back. Frank vaguely remembered him, a tall young man with dark hair, always well-dressed, who spoke with a city accent. "Frank? Everything okay in there?" The sound of Susan's voice from the other side of the door made him jump. "I'm fine, just washing my face." Frank picked the letter up off the floor and put everything back in the box. He needed to read them all, but not here. Not with Susan just a few feet away, making dinner as if nothing had happened. as if she hadn't been hiding devastating secrets for 3 decades. During dinner, he watched Susan and his daughters, Sarah, 29, a teacher at the local school, and Megan, 26, who worked at City Hall. Tyler, his youngest, 22, was also there, helping with the fishing on weekends. "Dad, you haven't even touched your food," Sarah observed, concerned. "Headache," Frank lied, forcing himself to take a bite of the fish chowder Susan had made. "It must be from the sun." "You work too hard," Megan said, rubbing her father's arm. Frank looked at the 3 women in his life, and for the first time in years, he questioned the physical similarities. Sarah had Susan's dark eyes, but the shape of her face was different, more angular. Megan looked more like him, especially when she smiled. Tyler was his spitting image, no doubt about it. But Sarah. Now that he thought more carefully, she'd always been different, taller, more elegant in her gestures, with a quick intelligence that neither he nor Susan possessed. "I'm going for a walk on the beach," he announced after dinner, grabbing the box he'd hidden under the bed. "Want some company?" Tyler offered. "I need to be alone for a while." The beach was deserted under the full moon. Frank sat on a rock where he used to fish as a child and opened the box again. One by one, he read every letter. There were 23 in all, spanning a period of 2 years. The passion described there was overwhelming, full of promises of escape and a new life. The last letter, dated December 1994, was different from the others. The handwriting was quicker, more desperate. "Gregory, I can't wait any longer. I found out I'm pregnant, and Frank can't know it's not his. You left without a word, and now I have to make a decision. I'm going to burn all our letters and try to forget what we had. If you ever come back, know that a part of me will always love you. But I choose to stay. I choose my family." Frank let the letter fall onto the sand. Sarah, his eldest daughter, who had always been the pride of the family, who had earned a scholarship to get her degree, who had delicate gestures and spoke like city folk. She wasn't his biological daughter. The sound of footsteps on the sand made him stand up quickly. It was David, his younger brother, who lived next door and worked in the fishing equipment trade. "Frank, what are you doing out here at this hour?" David had always been the successful brother, the one who had managed to escape the simple life of a fisherman and build a thriving business. He had a bigger house, a new car, and had always carried himself with a certain air of superiority toward the simple life Frank had chosen. "Just thinking," Frank answered, trying to hide the box. "Thinking about what?" David moved closer, and Frank noticed a strange glint in his eyes. "Or rather, thinking about who?" There was something in his brother's tone that didn't sit right. Frank knew him too well not to notice. "What are you talking about?" David smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Did you find anything interesting on your fishing trip today?" Frank's blood ran cold. "How do you know about the mother-of-pearl box? About Susan's love letters with Gregory Harrison?" David chuckled softly. "Brother, I've known about this for years." Frank stood up slowly, his fists clenching. "You knew?" "Of course I knew, but I never imagined that one day you'd find out too." "And you never thought about telling me?" David shrugged with cruel indifference. "Why would I? You were happy in your ignorance. You had your perfect family, your faithful Susan, your children who admired you. Why would I ruin that?" "Then why now?" David's smile widened, revealing a malice that Frank had never noticed in his brother. "Because I found this box 3 months ago, when I was doing recreational diving in the area where you fish. Susan threw everything into the sea the day she found out she was pregnant, but the currents carried it to a deeper place. I kept it with me, thinking about what to do." Frank felt his legs go weak. You put this in my net. I put it back in the sea where I knew you'd be fishing today. You know why?" David moved closer, his voice turning venomous. "Because I'm tired of seeing you think you're better than me, the humble fisherman, the good family man, the faithful husband. Meanwhile, your wife was cheating on you and you were raising another man's child as your own." Anger exploded in Frank's chest like a giant wave. He lunged at his brother, but David quickly backed away. "Easy, brother. It's not my fault. I just brought the truth to the surface." "Your damned truth," shouted Frank, his voice echoing across the empty beach. "Damned?" David laughed bitterly. "The truth is never damned, Frank. What's damned is living a lie for 30 years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, sir." Frank stood still, watching his brother walk away into the darkness. David's words echoed in his mind like hammer blows. 30 years of lies. Sarah wasn't his daughter. Susan had betrayed him. But why would David do this? What was the real reason behind this calculated cruelty? The next morning, Frank could barely look at Susan during breakfast. She tried to keep up normal conversation, but he answered in monosyllables, lost in tormenting thoughts. "Honey, you've been really strange since yesterday," said Susan, placing her hand over his. "Tell me what's going on." Frank looked at those hands he knew so well. Hands that had written love letters to another man. Hands that had touched Gregory Harrison the same way they touched him. "It's nothing, just work. Frank Miller, in 30 years of marriage, I've learned to read you like an open book. This isn't about work." Susan was right. She'd always known when something was bothering him. But now, for the first time, he had a secret he couldn't share. At least not yet. "I need to get to work," he said, getting up abruptly. "But you haven't even finished your coffee." Frank was already grabbing his fishing gear when Susan appeared on the porch. "If you don't want to talk to me, at least talk to Mrs. Ruth. She's always given you good advice." Mrs. Ruth was Frank's mother, a 72-year-old woman who lived in a simple little house in the center of the village. She was respected by everyone as a sort of informal advisor, always ready to help anyone in need. Susan's suggestion made Frank think. Maybe his mother could have some perspective on the situation. Or maybe she knew something he didn't. On the boat, Frank tried to focus on fishing, but his mind was elsewhere. Every wave that rocked the vessel seemed to bring a new, painful question. How had Susan managed to hide this for so long? How had he been so blind? And Sarah. How would he look at her knowing she wasn't his biological daughter? By around noon, he decided to head back to the coast. He couldn't fish in that state of mind. He needed answers, and maybe Mrs. Ruth was truly the right place to start. His mother's house sat on a narrow street paved with uneven stones, typical of the old villages along the Gulf Coast. Mrs. Ruth was in the small backyard, tending to her plants when Frank arrived. "What a surprise, son. You didn't tell me you were coming." "Decided at the last minute, Mum." Mrs. Ruth looked at him with a motherly gaze. "You look like you haven't slept a wink. Come here, sit in the shade, and tell me what's been troubling you." Frank hesitated. How do you start a conversation about something so devastating? "Mom, do you remember Gregory Harrison?" Mrs. Ruth's face shifted subtly. It was an almost imperceptible change, but Frank knew his mother all too well. "Gregory Harrison, Mr. Arthur's son, from the canning plant." "That's the one." "Yes, I remember. Why are you asking about him?" "Him and Susan, and did they know each other well?" Mrs. Ruth fell silent for a long moment, fiddling with the leaves of a plant, without any real need. "Frank, son, why these questions after all these years? Just answer me, Mom, was it important?" The silence stretched on and Frank felt his stomach tighten. His mother knew something. "Mom." "Son." Mrs. Ruth let out a heavy sigh. "There are some things that are sometimes better left in the past." "What things?" "Sit here next to me," she said, patting the wooden bench. "I'm going to tell you a story I never wanted to tell." Frank sat down, his heart pounding like a drum. "When you and Susan got married, I didn't think you were the perfect couple," Mrs. Ruth began slowly. "You were too simple, she was too much of a dreamer. But I thought love would overcome those differences. And after a few months of marriage, I started to notice that Susan didn't seem fulfilled. She did the housework, she talked to you, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I recognized." "What sadness?" "The sadness of someone who loves a person they can't have." Frank felt a lump in his throat. "Gregory. I found out about their romance by chance. I saw the two of them at Shell Beach one afternoon, and by the way they looked at each other, it was obvious there was something deep there. And you never told me. Mrs. Ruth turned to look him in the eyes. Son, you were so in love with Susan, so happy. How could I destroy that? Destroy? Mom, I had a right to know. Did you? Mrs. Ruth's voice grew firmer. And what would you have done? Confronted her, ended the marriage. And then what? Gregory was leaving anyway, everyone knew that. Making you suffer over something that had no future seemed cruel to me. Frank stood up, pacing nervously around the small backyard. But I lived a lie, Mom. 30 years of lies, did you? Mrs. Ruth also stood up. Were you unhappy those 30 years? Was Susan a bad wife? Were your daughters bad daughters? Was Tyler a bad son? That's not it. Then what is it, Frank? What changed between yesterday and today, other than your knowledge of something that happened decades ago? His mother's question left him without an answer. What had really changed? Susan was still the same woman. Sarah was still the same loving daughter. Megan and Tyler were still the same. Mom, Sarah, she is your daughter, Mrs. Ruth said firmly. She may not have your blood, but she is your daughter. You taught her to walk. You comforted her when she cried. You celebrated every accomplishment of hers. That's what makes a father, not a blood test. But Susan deceived me. Susan made a choice. She chose you. She chose the family you would build together. Her past with Gregory is exactly that, the past. Frank sat back down, his head in his hands. I don't know if I can forget this, Mom. You don't have to forget. You need to decide what's more important, what Susan did 30 years ago or the 30 years you've built together. Mrs. Ruth approached and put her hand on her son's shoulder. But there's something I need to tell you, and it might make everything more complicated. Frank looked up. What? Gregory is back. Frank's world seemed to stop. What do you mean he's back? He arrived last week. He's staying at the downtown inn. They say he came on business. What kind of business? It seems he's interested in buying the Fisherman's co-op. Frank felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The co-op was the economic heart of the village, the place where all the fishermen sold their catch and bought their equipment. If Gregory bought the co-op, does he know I'm married to Susan? I don't know, son, but in a small town like ours, he'll find out quickly. Frank stood up again, this time with determination. I need to go. Frank, wait. No, Mom, I need to settle this once and for all. Walking through the village streets toward downtown, Frank felt a mix of anger, fear, and curiosity. Gregory Harrison was back. The man who had been his wife's lover, his daughter's biological father, was in the same small town where there was no way to avoid running into each other. The downtown inn was an old two-story building, painted yellow with white trim. Frank knew the owner, Mr. Howard, a retired fisherman who had invested his savings in the small tourist business. Mr. Howard, is there a guest here named Gregory Harrison? There is, Frank. He arrived a few days ago. Why? I need to talk to him. He's in room 7, second floor, but I think he left a little while ago. I saw him walking toward the harbor. The harbor. Of course. Gregory was sizing up the co-op he wanted to buy. Frank ran toward the pier, his heart pounding. He found Gregory standing in front of the co-op building, watching the fishermen unload their nets. Even from behind, Frank recognized him immediately. Gray hair, still thick, upright posture, expensive clothes. Gregory Harrison. The man turned slowly. When their eyes met, Frank saw something he didn't expect. Genuine surprise, but also a deep sadness. Frank Miller. Gregory looked older than his 50-odd years. There was something in his appearance that suggested weariness, maybe even illness. I heard you want to buy our co-op. I want to make a fair offer to the members, Gregory replied calmly. It's a good investment. A good investment or a way to come back into the lives of people you abandoned? Gregory sighed, looking out at the harbor again. Frank, I imagine you know why I'm really here. I do. The question is whether you know what you know. The two men stared at each other in silence for a tense moment. "Can I offer you a coffee?" Gregory asked. "I think we have a lot to talk about." At the small cafe by the harbour, sitting at a table away from the other patrons, Gregory and Frank studied each other like two opponents trying to assess each other's strengths. "How did you find out?" Gregory asked at last. "Does it matter?" "To me it does." Frank told him about the box, the letters, his brother's cruel revelation. Gregory listened in silence, his eyes darkening with each detail. "David was always envious," Gregory said, when Frank finished, "even when we were teenagers." "You knew my brother?" "I knew everyone in the village, Frank. It was a small community. David was always jealous of your simplicity, of the way people naturally liked you." "And you?" Frank's voice came out harsher than he intended. "What were you jealous of?" Gregory was silent for a long moment, stirring his coffee, which he hadn't even tasted. "I was jealous of your luck," he said finally. "Luck?" "My luck was staying with Susan." The brutal honesty of the answer left Frank momentarily speechless. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was young and stupid, because I thought the world was bigger than Clear Creek, because I thought I'd find something better in New York." "And did you?" Gregory laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "I found professional success, money, status. I married a high society woman, had 2 kids who barely talked to me. And every day for the last 30 years, I've asked myself what my life would have been like if I'd stayed with Susan. Now you know she married me." "And was she happy?" The question caught Frank off guard. He had assumed he knew the answer, but now, faced with the possibility that Susan might not have been completely happy, he found himself uncertain. "She was," he finally answered, more trying to convince himself than stating a certainty. "I'm sure she was," said Gregory, surprising him. "Susan was always a wise woman. She chose you for a reason. She chose you because you ran away." "No, Frank. She chose you because she knew you would truly love her. I was a youthful fling, a fire that burns fast. You were the man who would build a solid life with her." Frank studied Gregory's face, looking for signs of lies or manipulation, but all he saw was painful sincerity. "Why did you come back now?" Gregory hesitated before answering. "Because I'm sick, Frank. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced stage. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less." The shock of the revelation made Frank lean back in his chair. "When I got the diagnosis, I made a list of things I needed to settle before I go. The first was to see Susan one last time, even if from a distance. The second was to meet my daughter. Sarah." "Sarah," Gregory repeated, and there was infinite tenderness in the way he said the name. "I did some research. I know she's a teacher, that she graduated with honors, that she's respected in the community. You did an excellent job raising her." "She's my daughter," said Frank firmly. "She is, and I would never try to change that. I just wanted to see her, to know how she turned out. If possible, without her ever knowing who I am." Frank was silent, processing all that information. Gregory was dying. He wanted to see Sarah. He wasn't trying to destroy his family. He was trying to have a goodbye. "And the co-op?" "The co-op is a real investment. I intend to leave my share to the Fisherman when I no longer need it. A way of giving back to the community I abandoned." "Does Susan know you're back?" "I haven't spoken to her. Like I said, I only wanted to see her from a distance. But in a small town, I know. It's impossible to avoid our paths crossing. That's why I wanted to talk to you first." Frank looked out the cafe window, watching the familiar bustle of the harbour. Fishermen unloading nets, women chatting, children running between the adults, his life, his community, his world. "What do you expect from me?" he asked at last. "Nothing. Just that you know I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came to make peace with my past before it's too late." "And what if I tell you, I don't want you here?" Gregory nodded slowly. "Then I'll leave. Today." The answer surprised Frank. He had expected arguments, pleas, attempts at manipulation, but Gregory seemed genuinely willing to leave if his presence was unwanted. "I need to think," said Frank, standing up. I understand. I'll stay at the hotel until tomorrow. If you decide I should go, I'll leave without causing any more disturbance. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Frank left the cafe with his mind even more confused than when he'd arrived. Gregory wasn't the villain he had imagined. He was a sick man, full of regret, who wanted only a quiet farewell. But that made everything more complicated, not simpler. When he got home, he found Susan on the porch, waiting with a worried expression. "Where have you been? Tyler said you came back from fishing in the middle of the morning." "I went to talk to my mother." And then, Frank hesitated. How could he explain that he had spent the afternoon talking to his wife's former lover? "Then I went to get some coffee." Susan approached, studying his face. "Frank, you're hiding something from me. In 30 years of marriage, I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Lost, confused, as if you were carrying a weight you don't know how to share." Susan's perception had always been one of her most admirable and at the same time most unsettling qualities. She could read people like few others could, especially him. "Susan," Frank began but stopped. How could he approach such a delicate subject? "What is it, dear? If I asked you about your past before our marriage, would you be honest with me?" Susan's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I've always been honest with you." "Always?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Susan stepped back a few paces, her hands nervously playing with the hem of her apron. "Why these questions, Frank? Answer me first. Have you always been honest with me?" Susan looked at him for a long moment, and Frank saw something break in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "Not always." The confession, even though expected, hit Frank like a punch to the stomach. "Gregory is back," he said softly. Susan staggered, as if she had been physically struck. She leaned against the porch wall, all the color draining from her face. "I know," she murmured. "You know. I saw him yesterday in the square. I recognized him even from a distance. He's changed a lot, but he was still Gregory." Susan nodded, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "Frank, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain 30 years of lies? Can you explain Sarah?" Upon hearing her daughter's name, Susan broke down. The tears she had held back burst forth, and she let herself slide down the wall until she was sitting on the porch floor. "How did you find out?" she sobbed. Frank told her about the box, the letters, David's cruel involvement. With each word, Susan cried louder until her sobs could be heard from the neighboring houses. "I threw it all into the sea," she said between tears. "I thought I had gotten rid of the past forever. But the past came back, Susan, in the form of a box that ended up in my net. It was David who put it there, wasn't it?" Susan wiped her face with trembling hands. "He always looked at me strangely, as if he knew something. He knew, and he decided it was time for you to pay for your lie." Susan slowly got to her feet, meeting Frank's gaze. "You have the right to hate me. You have the right to leave me. You have the right to never forgive me. But you need to know one thing. I love you. I've always loved you. But you loved Gregory too." "I did," Susan admitted. "But they were different kinds of love. Gregory was like a hurricane. Intense, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. But hurricanes pass, Frank. They leave destruction behind. And me?" Susan stepped closer, placing her hands on his face. "You were like the calm sea, constant, safe, reliable. You were the place where I could build a real life. So I was the second choice." "No," Susan said vehemently. "You were the right choice. There's a difference between being the second choice and being the right choice." "And Sarah? How do you explain not having told me about Sarah?" Susan sighed deeply, as if gathering the courage for a final confession. "When I found out I was pregnant, Gregory had already left without a word. I could have tried to contact him, I could have told him about the pregnancy, but I didn't want to. Why? Because I realized that what we felt for each other was passion, not true love. Passion doesn't sustain a family, Frank. Love does. And I loved you. I loved your kindness, your simplicity, your way of seeing the world. But Sarah has the right to know her biological father. Sarah has a father. You. Gregory may have contributed half of her genes, but you're the one who taught her to walk. You're the one who comforted her when she cried. You're the one who celebrated every achievement. Susan's words echoed her mother's, making Frank question his own priorities. What truly mattered? Biology or the relationship built over the years? I need time, he said finally. How much time? I don't know. Maybe a lot. Maybe forever. Susan nodded, trying to hold back her tears. I'll stay at my sister's house for a few days, to give you space to think. And the girls, Tyler, they'll want to know why. I'll tell them we're going through a rough patch, that we need some time apart to work through some problems. It's the truth, Frank said bitterly. It is, Susan agreed. Unfortunately, it is. That night, Frank had dinner alone for the first time in decades. Sarah showed up to see how he was doing, worried about her mother's sudden absence. Dad, what's going on? Mom left the house with a suitcase crying, and wouldn't explain anything. Frank looked at his daughter, and saw Susan in her eyes, but he also saw features he now knew were Gregory's. The shape of her nose, the line of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was worried. We're going through a difficult time, sweetheart. Are you two getting separated? Sarah's direct question caught him off guard. I don't know. Does it have to do with that man who came to town, Mrs. Gladys mentioned you were seen talking to him at the cafe. Frank sighed. In small towns, nothing went unnoticed. Sarah, come sit here next to me. She sat on the couch beside him, and Frank felt the urge to hug her, to shield her from the painful truth he was about to reveal. Dad, you're scaring me. Honey, there are things about your mother's past that I didn't know, things that affect our family. What kind of things? Frank hesitated. Did Sarah have the right to know the truth? Or would revealing it be even crueler? Your mother had a relationship before she married me, with that man who came back to town. Gregory Harrison, Sarah said, surprising him. You know his name? I heard some people talking. They say he's interested in buying the co-op. But Dad, if it was before you two got married, why does it matter now? Frank looked into Sarah's eyes, so much like Susan's, and felt his heart break. How could he explain that her very existence was the result of that past romance? Because their relationship continued after our marriage. For a few months, Sarah went silent, processing the information. Mom cheated on you. Yes. And you just found out now. Yes. How? Frank told her about the box, the letters, omitting only the revelation about Sarah's paternity. That truth, he decided, could wait. Maybe it would never need to be revealed. And this Gregory, does he know that you know? He knows. We talked today. And what did he say? That he regrets leaving, that he still loves your mother to this day. Sarah was silent for a long moment, looking at her own hands. Dad, can I ask a difficult question? Go ahead. Can you forgive Mom? It was exactly the question Frank had been asking himself since discovering the letters. I don't know, honey. I don't know if I can. But do you still love her? I do, he answered without hesitation. And that's what makes it all the harder. Sarah placed her hand over her father's. Dad, can I give you some advice? Of course. 30 years is a long time to throw away because of something that happened in the past, especially if you still love Mom. But how can we trust her again? I don't know if you can trust her the same way as before, but maybe you can trust her differently. A trust built on honesty, not ignorance. Sarah's wisdom surprised Frank. His daughter, so young, seemed to understand emotional complexities he himself was struggling to process. Thank you, sweetheart. For what? For being exactly the daughter I needed. Sarah smiled and hugged her father, unaware that those words held a much deeper meaning than she could imagine. The next morning, Frank woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in days. He needed to have a conversation with Susan, but before that, there was something he wanted to do. He found Gregory having coffee at the downtown inn, looking more fragile than the day before. The illness was clearly advancing quickly. "Frank, didn't expect to see you today. I didn't expect to be here either, but I need to ask you a favor." "What favor?" "I want you to meet Sarah, officially." The surprise on Gregory's face was genuine. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think it's the right thing to do. She's an adult woman, intelligent. She has the right to know you. How do you plan to present this to her?" "With the truth. All of it." Gregory nodded slowly. "And what if she doesn't want to meet me?" "Then you'll respect her decision and leave." "Agreed." "And Gregory?" "Yes?" "If you hurt my daughter in any way, sick or not, I'll kill you." Gregory smiled sadly. "I understand, and I completely agree." Frank found Sarah at the school where she worked. It was late afternoon, and she was organizing materials for the next day when he appeared at the classroom door. "Dad, what a surprise. Did you come to pick me up?" "I came to talk about last night." Sarah stopped what she was doing and gave her father her full attention. "What about last night?" "I didn't tell you the whole truth." "What truth?" Frank took a deep breath, preparing himself for one of the hardest conversations of his life. "Sarah, you're my daughter in every way that matters, but biologically, you're Gregory Harrison's daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood still, the school materials still in her hands, processing the information she had just received. You're my daughter," Frank repeated firmly. "But your biological father is Gregory." Sarah sat down heavily in the teacher's chair, her face pale. "That's why Mom left home." "Partly, but mostly because I found out about the betrayal and didn't know how to handle it." "And you still consider me your daughter?" The question broke Frank's heart. He stepped closer and took Sarah's hands. "Sarah, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. You're my daughter. You always have been, and you always will be. Nothing we've discovered changes that." "Nothing." Tears began to stream down Sarah's face. "But I'm not really your daughter." "Yes, you are. Being a father isn't about blood. It's about love, care, presence. I've been there for every moment of your life. I've chosen you as my daughter every single day for the last 29 years. And this Gregory, does he know?" "He knows, and he wants to meet you. But only if you want to meet him." Sarah was silent for a long moment, wiping away her tears with her hands. "Does he look like you?" The question caught Frank off guard. "No. You two have some physical similarities, but you look much more like your mother." "No, Dad. I'm asking if he's a good person like you." The love in Sarah's question almost made Frank cry. "I don't know, sweetheart. I think he's a complicated man who made bad choices when he was young, but he seems remorseful." "And is he really sick?" "He is. Very sick." Sarah sighed deeply. "I want to meet him. Not as a father, but as the person who's part of my story." "Are you sure?" "I am, but on one condition." "What?" "You stay present. I don't want to meet him alone." "Of course." The meeting was set for the following day at Mrs. Ruth's house. Frank's mother had offered to host the meeting, understanding that it would be a delicate moment for everyone involved. Gregory arrived promptly, wearing a simple dress shirt and dark pants. He seemed even more fragile than in the previous days, but his eyes lit up when he saw Sarah for the first time. "Sarah," he said softly, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you officially." Sarah studied him carefully, looking for similarities, differences, clues about who this man was who shared her genes. "Gregory," she replied, extending her hand formally. They sat in Mrs. Ruth's small living room, who had prepared coffee and cakes, creating a more welcoming atmosphere for the difficult occasion. "Do you have questions for me?" Gregory asked after a few minutes of small talk. "I have several," Sarah admitted, "but I don't know where to begin." "Start with the one that bothers you the most." Sarah looked at Frank, who nodded encouragingly. "Why did you abandon my mother?" The question was direct, without beating around the bush, and Gregory received it with respect. Because I was young, stupid, and thought the world owed me something bigger. I thought I'd find something better in New York. And did you find it? I found professional success and an empty life. I married out of convenience, had children I barely know, and every day I asked myself what it would have been like if I had stayed. And my mother? Did you truly love her? Gregory looked at Frank before answering. I did. But it was a selfish, youthful love. It wasn't the kind of love that builds families or sustains long relationships. And now do you still love her? I love the memory of what we lived, but I recognize that Susan made the right choice. Your father... Gregory looked directly at Frank. Your father is the man she deserved. Why did you come back? Because I'm dying and wanted to make peace with my past. I wanted to see you, even from afar. I wanted to know how the daughter I never knew turned out. And how do you think I turned out? Gregory smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Extraordinary, intelligent, strong, compassionate. Everything a daughter should be. Thanks to my father, said Sarah, looking affectionately at Frank. Yes, Gregory agreed. Thanks to your father. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Gregory talked about his life in New York, his regrets, his illness. Sarah asked questions about his biological family, about traits she might have inherited, about what he wanted her to know. When he left, Gregory briefly hugged Sarah. Thank you for giving me the chance to meet you, he said. You are everything I could have hoped for in a daughter. Thank you for being honest with me, Sarah replied. And Gregory? Yes? I'm sorry you're sick. So am I, but meeting you made it worth coming back. After Gregory left, Sarah turned to Frank. Dad, can I ask you one more question? Always. What did you think of him? Frank thought carefully before answering. I think he's a man who made bad choices and is paying the price, but I also think he loved you in his own way, even without knowing you. And you? Can you forgive him? I think so. He's not the enemy I imagined. He's just a broken man trying to fix what he can before he dies. And Mom, will you be able to forgive her? Frank sighed. I don't know yet. But after today, after seeing how you handled all of this, I think I have to try. That night, Frank went to Susan's sister's house to pick her up. He found her in the small backyard, looking at the stars. Susan. She turned around, her face swollen from crying. Frank, I didn't expect to see you. We need to talk. Susan nodded, leading him to the porch of her sister's house. I told Sarah, Frank said without preamble. Susan's face went pale. Told her what? Everything. About Gregory, about her being biologically his daughter. My God. How did she react? With more maturity than me, she wanted to meet him. And did she? This afternoon at my mother's house. Susan fell silent, processing the information. And how did it go? Calm, respectful. Gregory made it clear he doesn't want to take my place. He just wanted to meet her before he dies. Dies? Susan was startled. Cancer, advanced stage. Susan brought her hands to her face, starting to cry again. That's why he came back. Yes, to make peace with the past. And you? Susan looked at him through her tears. Were you able to make peace? I'm trying. With me too. Frank approached and for the first time in days touched Susan's face. I want to try. But it won't be easy. It won't be like before. I know. There has to be complete honesty from here on out. No secrets, no omissions. Agreed. And it's going to take time for me to fully trust again. I understand. But Susan, I love you. I still love you. And 30 years is too much time to throw away. Susan threw herself into Frank's arms, crying with relief and gratitude. I love you so much, she sobbed. I never stopped loving you. I know, said Frank, holding her tightly. I know. In the days that followed, the Miller family slowly began to rebuild itself. Susan moved back home, but she and Frank slept in separate rooms, taking the necessary time to rebuild intimacy. Gregory stayed another week in the town, finalizing the purchase of the co-op and establishing the terms of transfer to the Fisherman once his absence became permanent. He had a few more meetings with Sarah, always in Frank's presence, developing a respectful and affectionate relationship that never tried to compete with the real fatherhood that Frank represented. Tyler and Megan were informed about the situation gradually. Tyler, initially outraged by his mother's betrayal, needed several conversations with Frank to understand that adults are complex people who make mistakes. Megan, more emotionally mature, focused on helping the family reunite. David, on the other hand, became persona non grata. When the town found out he had orchestrated the cruel revelation of the family secrets, many people distanced themselves from him. His own business began to suffer, and he ended up selling everything and moving to another city. "Envy is a disease," commented Mrs. Ruth when she heard about her son's departure, and David had been sick for a long time. 3 weeks after the initial revelation, Gregory said goodbye to the Miller family and the town of Clear Creek. He was visibly weaker, and everyone knew they probably wouldn't see him again. "Thank you," he told Frank at the farewell, "for letting me meet Sarah, for not treating me like an enemy, for being the man Susan deserved." "Thank you," replied Frank, "for being honest, for not trying to destroy what we built." Gregory hugged Sarah one last time. "Be happy," he said, "and know that having you as a daughter, even if only for a short time, was one of the few good things in my life." "Take care of yourself," replied Sarah, "and thank you for giving me the chance to get to know you." Susan said goodbye last. It was a tense moment, heavy with history and unresolved emotions. "Do you forgive me?" asked Gregory. "I forgave you a long time ago," replied Susan. "The question is whether you can forgive yourself." "I'm learning." "Then learn quickly, you don't have much time." Gregory smiled sadly and left, leaving behind a family that had been shaken but was rebuilding itself on more solid foundations. 2 months later, Frank received a call from New York. Gregory had passed away peacefully, leaving specific instructions about his assets. The co-op share was transferred in full to the Fisherman of Clear Creek, as promised. But there was a surprise. Gregory had also left a considerable amount of money for Sarah, along with a letter. "Sarah, I don't intend to buy your love or try to make up for the absent years. This money is for you to invest in your dreams, in your education, in anything that makes you happy. Use it knowing it came from someone who, even from afar, and for a short time, genuinely loved you. Your father, the real one, is Frank Miller. Never forget that. But also know that a small part of me lives in you, and I hope it's the good part. Be happy, Gregory." Sarah decided to use the money to pursue a graduate degree in education, something she had always dreamed of, but that was beyond her family's financial means. The irony was not lost on her. The man who could have destroyed her family ended up offering new opportunities for her life. 6 months after the discovery of the letters, Frank and Susan had found a new balance. Trust was no longer blind as before, but it was deeper, based on complete honesty and the conscious choice to be together. "Have you truly forgiven me?" Susan asked one night as they walked along the beach where it all had begun. "Not in the way you expect," Frank answered honestly. "I haven't been able to forget what happened, but I've learned to live with it." "And is that enough?" "It's more than enough. It's real." Susan stopped walking and looked at the sea where, months earlier, Frank had fished out the box that had revealed his secrets. "Sometimes I think that box came to the surface because it was time. Time to clear the past. Time to build something new on the truth." "Perhaps," Frank agreed. "Or perhaps my brother is just a bitter man who wanted to destroy our happiness. Both things can be true." They continued walking in silence, and Frank reflected on how life had changed. His family was no longer the same as before the revelation, but perhaps it was better. It was more honest, stronger, built on conscious choices rather than ignorance. Sarah had become even closer to him, valuing his fatherhood more consciously. Tyler and Megan had learned that parents are imperfect people, which had made them more mature. Susan had become more attentive, more affectionate. as if she wanted to make up for the years of secrets. And he himself had learned that loving someone didn't mean possessing their complete story, but choosing to build a future together despite the imperfections of the past. 1 year after the discovery of the letters, Frank and Susan renewed their wedding vows in a simple ceremony at the local church. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past, but an affirmation of their commitment to the future. Sarah was the maid of honor, symbolizing not only her support for the couple, but also her understanding that families are built by love, not by biological accident. During the ceremony, the priest spoke about forgiveness, second chances, and the courage needed to rebuild damaged relationships. His words echoed through the small church, touching not only Frank and Susan, but the entire community that had witnessed the family's crisis and reconciliation. True love, the priest said, is not the absence of problems. It's the decision to face problems together. After the ceremony, there was a simple party on the beach. Mrs. Ruth, now frailer but still lucid, danced with Frank. "I'm proud of you, son," she said. "You chose forgiveness over bitterness. You chose family over pride." "I learned from you, Mother." "No," said Mrs. Ruth, smiling. "You taught me. You taught me that it's never too late to make the right choice." As the party continued, Frank stepped away for a few minutes, walking to the spot on the pier where he had found the box that had changed his life. The sea was calm, reflecting the colorful lights of the party. Sarah approached, now a confident and accomplished young woman of 30. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "About how strange life is. An old box almost destroyed our family, but in the end it made us stronger." "Do you think it was fate?" Frank considered the question. "I think it was luck. We were lucky enough to love each other enough to get past the truth. Not every family can do that. And if we hadn't? Then we would have learned other lessons, but I'm glad we learned this one." Sarah hugged her father, just as she had done since she was a child. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Thank you for still being my father, even after knowing the truth. Thank you for still being my daughter." They stood there for a few more minutes, father and daughter, not by blood, but by choice, looking out at the sea that had kept secrets for so long and had now set them free. The music from the party reached them, mingled with the sound of the waves and the voices of the people they loved. It was the sound of a family that had been broken and mended, that had weathered the storm and found a new kind of peace on the other side. Frank thought of Gregory, who had left behind not destruction, but a strange kind of healing. He thought of David, whose envy had inadvertently strengthened the family bonds he had tried to destroy. He thought of Susan, who had carried secrets for 30 years and could now live in the truth. But mostly he thought about the future, about the choices they would still have to make, about the challenges they would still face as a family, because now he knew they could face anything as long as they faced it together. The sea continued its eternal motion, keeping new secrets, carrying away the old ones, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding along its shores. But for Frank Miller, a fisherman from Clear Creek, father of 3 children and husband of Susan, the sea had become something different. It was no longer just his workplace or his livelihood. It was the place where he had discovered that the truth, no matter how painful, is always preferable to a lie. It was the place where he had learned that true families are built by choice, not by chance. And as he walked back to the party, to his wife and children, to his life rebuilt on stronger foundations, Frank Miller knew he had found something in the waters of his small town that was worth more than all the fish in the ocean: the certainty that true love can survive any storm. The end. What about you? What did you think of this story of forgiveness and family rebuilding? Can you imagine how hard it would be to forgive a 30-year betrayal? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most and whether you think Frank made the right decision. We'd love to know your thoughts on these stories that touch the heart.